morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
What's up?
I'm waiting. How about, is it working this week?
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
I can hear you. I can see you. We are ready to party with Mr. Jeremy Allison. We're going to be talking about Samba today, all things Samba. So I let him know. I need to know why. I need to know how, and then I need to really understand the why again. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But first of all, Jeremy, we have a cool giveaway. Have you seen this thing yet?
I haven't, no.
It is actually pretty cool. So I'm going to do a little present. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go in here. This is the one right there. Boom. So we are giving away like our very, oh, look at that. So cool. It's a little Carhartt backpack. I know. It's got the
How do I get one?
I know.
You're not eligible, Jeremy. Sorry. We keep having to say that. Not eligible.
We keep needing to say it. So we are 39. I think I did that math right? Like 1,000 minus 961. We are 39 subscribers away from our 1,000th YouTube subscriptions. We are so excited. So make sure that you share this, that you like it, that you subscribe, that you share it, all the things. And when we reach 1,000, we are going to go into our archives and we're going to do maybe we'll make ChatGPT do it, right? Like pick a random number, pick a random person. I'm going to pick them, and then they are going to.
That's random enough.
Is it? No?
I know Jeremy has opinions on writing code for random numbers.
Please don't trigger me.
That is a good point, but probably a side note. But I like your spirit. We are going to pick a lucky winner, and they're going to win that backpack. Then, of course, we will get in touch with you however we possibly can. We're going to be, of course, sharing it live on that session as well. Okay, so we're getting there. We're close. This is amazing.
FIPS compliant random number generation, of course.
What's that?
I said FIPS compliant random number generation, of course.
See,
Next
this
level
is why we have you, Jeremy, to keep us honest in here for sure. So I actually, there's a little link in here that you guys gave me. This is actually on our CIQ website because Samba. So probably most people who are watching this or ever will watch this has at least heard the word Samba, if not have intimate relationship with it. Maybe. So do you mind if I just read these like couple little paragraphs that we have on what Samba is to kind of get us all on the same page?
No problem.
Okay. And then you can correct us if there's an editing error. Samba is an open source software suite that enables file and print sharing between Unix-like systems and Windows-based systems. It implements the Server Message Block, SMB protocol, allowing computers to easily share resources across different operating systems. With Samba, Linux, Unix-based servers can provide shared directories as network drives to Windows clients, granting users the ability to access and manage files as if they were local. Samba also supports printer sharing, ensuring that printers connected to the Samba server are accessible to Windows users. With this authentication options, integration and Windows domains, and a user-friendly web-based administration tool, Samba facilitates integration and secure resource sharing in platform environments.
Very impressive. We ditched the web-based administration tool a while ago.
Okay, this is good to know.
People did that much better than the Samba team. That's kind of accurate. It misses a massive, it's very old, unfortunately, just like Samba. It misses a massive chunk of functionality that we now have. Just as some research for this podcast, I downloaded the very first version of Samba available, the source code.
Oh, wow.
And the lines of code. And this was the one I remember working on back in around, we predate Linux, or we started around the same time as the Linux kernel itself. And the very first version of Samba was 5,000 lines of C code. And so it was small, it was easy to get your mind around. Let me give you a guess. How big do you think the current 4.20 released version of Samba is now? How many lines of C code?
I'm going to guess the high hundreds of thousands, like 900,000.
You guess?
I would say 567,000.
5 million.
5 million.
Wow.
5 million.
Wow.
That does include the Python too, but there's 5 million lines of code in there. That's 30 years of growth for you. So Samba started by the smartest man in Australia, Andrew Tridgell, mainly because he was doing a PhD that he was very bored with, and he was doing a computer science PhD, I believe, and he just hated it. And as he said, never underestimate the power of a procrastinating student. So he had a DEC machine that he wanted to communicate with for some reason. And he basically looked at the network traffic and decided he was going to implement that, and published it under an open source GPL license. And I was the first person who sent him a patch because he was wrong, of course. And then another chap in Germany, Walter Lembecke, who's still involved with Samba. Both he and I are still involved with Samba. Tridge has gone on to greater and more interesting things. He submitted the third patch. And why did we do that? Because we needed it. So at the time, I was working on porting some software to the brand new operating system that was going to take over the world, called Windows NT, right? And as everybody knows, that runs everything these days. Oh, wait. Anyway, at the time, it was going to make all Unixes obsolete, etc. So everybody wanted to port their software onto Windows. But the problem was Windows would only talk effectively to Windows. And they had this, what was considered, well, it was at that time, a proprietary network file system called SMB, server message block. It was actually invented by a chap called Barry Feigenbaum, who worked for IBM. I've actually met him. He came to a Samba conference one year. And we got to ask him questions like, why did you do this? But yeah, it was a proprietary file system. It was no information on how it worked was published. And so Tridge reverse engineered it, essentially, although we don't use those words these days because of legal issues. But he worked out how it worked, and he published code. And I needed that because I was trying to write code that ran on Windows, but the source code control system ran on Unix, and I needed a way to bridge that gap. So that's how it started. The printing came later, and the printing, thank God, is almost completely dead now. Only masochists use Samba to share printers. There are much better ways of sharing printers these days. But the big missing piece that we really should update that blurb about is Active Directory. So I presume everybody's heard of Microsoft's Active Directory. Samba is now a full open source Active Directory domain controller. You can deploy a network of Active Directory domains, and you can run the whole thing on Samba. And Windows can join, Linux machines can join, anything that's an Active Directory client can join. And so that's probably about 4 million of the 5 million lines of code just for that, because that thing is really complex. Yeah, so that's the why, really. And you know, we've been developing this for 30 years. The reason it still exists, because let's be honest, when was the last time you used your Windows or Mac machine and you saved something to a local share? 10 years ago? 15 years ago? You stick it in the cloud now, right? Like everybody else does. And in fact, if you ask most people on the street, what is a file system? Where do things go? in the cloud. It goes to Amazon, Google, Microsoft, whatever. They don't really know all their apps on their phone. They store stuff, but they don't really know where they go. And they don't have to care. And that's a good thing. I mean, remember the days of local area networks, everyone having to work out where things were and share it. That was the era that Samba was created for. So it's not exactly as popular in that way. I mean, we used to be so popular that when Red Hat first started selling Linux in box sets that you could buy at Fry's or your local tech center, they would actually put contains Samba 1.9 point whatever, or contains Apache. They would actually put the version numbers because it was an exciting feature. These days, Samba is plumbing technology. So, why is it still here? The reason is because SMB, the file system that wouldn't die, is in everything. It's in your Mac. It's in your Linux box. It's in your iPhone. It's in your network appliance server. It's in the little autonomous NAS services that people sell as home backup devices. SMB is everywhere. And it's really interesting how that actually came to be. Samba is actually part of that, despite Microsoft's best efforts at the time. They're really glad we exist now. For the longest time, for the first 15 years of our existence, they were not happy that we existed. But now, pretty much like Linux, they're really happy we exist. So Samba is used in many of the same places that NFS would be used. Samba also now has a clustered file system. So most people don't actually know or care where their files go, but administrators, engineers, people who run complex systems, they have to know. And that's where Samba has moved into. Samba has moved into this sort of plumbing layer. And sometimes it's used as a gateway, so you can attach to a share that actually then backs up into the cloud. It's become part of the infrastructure, really. And, it's big, it's complex. Samba used to be considered a product. It's like, what's your version of Samba? What's your version of SMB? These days, Samba is much more like a big Lego kit of parts. Not so much the Duplo Lego, more like the Technics Lego. it's complicated.
You can build much more complex things, yeah. Yeah,
you can build more complex things, and it's quite complex to set up. But because it's open source, because you can get you get at the internals of it, you can make it do an amazing number of flexible things. I'm always surprised by the number of places Samba gets used and the number of things that people do with it. And of course, because it's open source, they don't have to tell us. They just do it and make it do what they need it to do. So that's kind of really fun. And that's why it's still interesting. Oh, yes. Question. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just.
I have lots of questions too, Rose. Come on.
I know. I'd love to hear you going, but
I'm sorry. I like this.
No, you're good, Jeremy. You're good.
Yeah, some weird question. So you said that back in the day when it was first released, that guy, sorry, I should have jotted down his name. What was the platform called where he released that on open source, leading into where is Samba now maintained?
Well, he released it on an FTP site. Okay. If you remember that was the server that he had running in his department. He was at the Australian.
How did you get it? How did you
I downloaded it. I was on a mailing list, and he said, I've created this thing, and it had a link to the FTP site, so I typed FTP in and downloaded it. And there was the source. We didn't have source code control back in those days. So I sent him a patch, and 10 minutes later, a new version came out. It's coin operated.
And mailing list is not like the spam thing. It's not like the spam thing we're used to today. Mailing lists back then used to be very useful.
We have a question from Dave Rush. Where did CIFS fit into the development timeline? So CIFS stands for Common Internet File System, and the only thing that is true about that is it's common. because it wasn't an internet. It's not a file system, and it wasn't designed for the internet. So what happened was, back when Sun and Microsoft were squabbling and fighting, if everyone remembers Sun Microsystems, now bought by Oracle, they were the colossuses of their day fighting with each other. And Sun created a network file system called WebNFS, which was network file system run over the internet. And of course, Microsoft said, we have to have something like that. So they took SMB, said, this works over the internet too, because it worked over TCP. And so they created this thing they called CIFS, and they started to document it. It was a terrible idea. And it's still, that name is still in legacy, but everyone really uses the newest version of the protocol now called SMB3. So CIFS is kind of a legacy thing that was literally a marketing exercise back in the late 90s, early 2000s. This happened just before Sun sued Microsoft, but we'll get about SMB, but we can get into that later if you like. Yes.
I have two different questions for you, Jeremy. I got two.
Sure.
So one, I think I know the answer, but how did you guys land on the name Samba? Samba. That's one.
Yeah. So this was Tridge. We were originally called SMB Server, and a company in Washington State contacted us in the Seattle area. Very politely and very nicely said, I'm sorry, but we're selling a proprietary product that does the same, and we have a trademark on this, so you're going to have to find a new name. So Tridge, being the Unix hacker he is, he grepped for the letters, grep is a text search for the letters S, M, and B in all the words in user-dict words, which was the Unix spelling database. And it came out with Samba and Salmonberry.
Good
so
choice.
he decided, yeah, let's call it Samba. That's kind of a better name. Funnily enough, many years later, the guy who sent him that email actually ran into him at a Linux conference and said, man, I wish we hadn't done that. Samba was a much cooler name, because a lot of those proprietary vendors went out of business once Samba got popular, because there's no way to compete. Interestingly enough, the SMB market is much more varied and diverse and popular now than it ever was back when Microsoft tried to keep it a secret. And that's actually an interesting lesson, but that comes along with the lawsuit and the whole, European Union antitrust stuff. But yeah, it's a much more vibrant market now. There are many different implementations of SMB that you can get for just about any platform. It's like the universal glue. So NFS is fine if everyone knows NFS for Unix, but NFS is kind of Unix to Unix. SMB, even though it's designed only around Windows and the initial requirements for it is make Windows work with Windows, people have made this thing work with just about anything. One of the CIQ engineers, Ronnie Solberg, he has an SMB library that works on his PlayStation. He uses it to access PlayStation library games over SMB. Why?
That's cool.
Because he can.
So hearing all the different use cases, it always makes me wonder, because SMB is everywhere, what do you think, or what's something that comes to mind as a cultural impact of all of this? Because it has definitely impacted a lot of different platforms, companies, people, the way that we view file systems, the way that we share file systems. Like, well, what would you say is a cultural impact of this?
So I think what it did was it taught a generation of engineers that interoperability was good. Now we're moving away from that with the cloud platforms who are isolated silos and saying, oh no, you must do this our way, only our protocols, etc. The pendulum will swing back again. Because if you remember the back in the day when Samba was created and SMB was being used, the 900-pound gorilla in the room was NetWare, and they were proprietary. You couldn't create a network. There was only Novell could create the NetWare client and server, and so Microsoft, they did try and open it up a little bit. CIFS was one effort. Some documentation efforts were another. They didn't want to let it go completely, but they let enough go to make it possible to interoperate, and eventually, and the antitrust violations, of course, crushed NetWare. And then essentially all of the products, they began to realize, especially after the European Union lawsuit, that actually documenting all of this was really good, because what it meant was that, even though it was harder to control, they gave up some control, but what they gained was ubiquity. It went everywhere. Apple decided to use SMB3 as their, they replaced what was it, AFP, Apple Talk File Protocol. Yeah, they replaced it with SMB. NetApp started using it. IBM started using it. IBM had something like 15 different SMB implementations at one point. Samba was just one of them. But it went everywhere. And so, the reason for that is if you're writing applications, sort of your standard server applications, you've got to store stuff on a file system. And, before the cloud, it was really convenient to be able to store things centrally on a different server. So you would have your storage server, and that would serve all the clients running compute or whatever applications, but they could all access the same stuff simultaneously. And before applications were re-architected for the cloud, that was kind of important, because when you're doing cloud work, nothing can happen until the file is complete. You upload a file to the cloud, no one else even sees it until you've saved it. You want to make a change, you want to change one character, whole new version gets saved. SMB isn't like that, like NFS. It's a real file system. You want to change 1 byte in the middle of a file, you could do that. You want to have a lock over the first 10 bytes, of a file, so that no one else can access that while you're working on it. You can do that over SMB. You can't do that in the cloud. So you have to re-architect your applications to work cloud native. Now, obviously, that's in the process of going on. But under the covers, it's still really convenient to have what looks like a real file system, where you've got directories, and the other thing is you can have a clustered version of SMB, so that you can have essentially many front-end nodes that clients talk to, and they all share a common backend. And Samba has a clustered implementation, as do many other vendors as well. So, I mean, the reason NFS is still popular, NFS actually learned, NFS version 3 was stateless, and it was Unix to Unix. It was kind of a mess. It worked, but anyone who's of a certain age will remember NFS server not responding, still trying, as the bane of their existence. So SMB is not stateless. It's connected over a TCP pipe. It now runs, you can do RDMA over it, SMB Direct, they called it. It's more complex, and NFS v4 basically copied many of the features from SMB3. And so they kind of compete. So NFS is considered like the Unixy way of doing things, but SMB is the Windowsy way of doing things. But we're actually working on making SMB3, at least in Samba, more capable of providing Unix semantics. And most people are actually just want to store their files. Their eyes are glazing over at this point. It's like, why should I care? But the people in the back end who are actually working on storage solutions, this is really important for them, because it means that you can craft a solution around the very familiar Unix interfaces, and yet you don't have to use NFS. You can use SMB. And in fact, Volker, who still works on Samba, his stated goal is, I want to kill NFS. So yes, and I don't blame him for that, because NFS is pretty horrible. Sorry for the bad Volker, by the way. He doesn't really speak like that. His English is better than mine. So
that's great.
Well, with an accent, you can really say anything, and Americans just like it. It always sounds nice and pleasant and friendly.
Yes, we can be very sarcastic though. Yes.
So you said that is there no longer a web interface? I'm sorry, I'm so ignorant.
Oh no, there's many web interfaces, but they're just not maintained by the Samba team. So we had a web interface that basically allowed you to configure Samba, because we run out of a very complex configuration file. And so this was very hard for people to use. And so we thought, oh, we'll make this easy by adding a web interface. We were so bad at it. So these days, Samba is a kit of parts. You want to have a friendly web interface to manage it, like, IX systems with TrueNAS or Synology or QNAP or any of the server vendors. They give you a web interface. It's a million times better than what we had. So, you don't even have to know that you're using Samba or SMB. You just configure it using the web interface and everything works.
That's awesome. So
One of those vendors you mentioned, I don't know that I would say their user interface is all that great either.
Sorry?
One of those home NAS appliances, I wouldn't say their web interface is all that
Well, they're better than what
one
we
in particular I'm thinking of. Okay.
We did try, but we're not user interface programmers. We are, we are systems programmers. So Samba has spun off a bunch of different technologies that are actually used in many other places. So the user management agent SSSD uses a bunch of Samba technologies. GNOME used a bunch of Samba technologies internally. Because some of the libraries we just spun off, there's some incredibly useful libraries in Samba. So I mean, everybody wants to do JavaScript or Rust or whatever the new hotness is, but if you're having to write C or C++ or whatever, there's some amazingly useful things still in Samba. There's an entire asynchronous C library, event-driven library that we use. There's also multi-threaded. That's why it's 5 million lines of code. There's just an amazing amount of technology in there, and it's fun to work on. Although it's hard to sell developers who like doing apps on phones. No, drop all that stuff. Start using VI on a command line interface to work on back-end C code. Yeah, that's what you want to do. So we're all getting old, but working on it.
Where are you guys? Where is the community? Do you have like a channel? Are you guys on GitHub? Like, how do you communicate?
We're so old, we use email.
Still on the email list.
We have the Samba mailing list and the Samba technical mailing list. And originally Samba was kind of a benevolent dictator model run by Tridge and me as and then eventually, when Tridge left, I inherited the mantle of benevolent dictator, and I really didn't want to do that. So at that point, I abdicated essentially and set up a committee that runs Samba. But we do most of our communication via email. I mean, there are various other channels that people use, but and in fact, all of our development now is done on GitLab using Git. And so that's where people put pull requests and changes and run continuous integration. And, it's a complicated project. In order to get a piece of code change into there, it has to run through a full regression test, which tests every single config, including Active Directory. The whole thing takes like 4 hours to run. You make a one-line change, it's going to be 4 hours before we know that you didn't break anything. So.
Does it have to run through 5 million lines of code to change one line?
Well, no, it has to. It's not actually. That's just the amount of code that's in there. What it has to do is to make sure that what you're changing doesn't break any of the expected file system semantics. So that's what the test suites do. They test Active Directory, they test Active Directory replication, they test the networking part of it. They test the file sharing, the locking, the file exclusion. Every single thing that we can test, we do test. And the way we wrote those tests is we ran them against a Windows server. And they're like, okay, if we want to know how something works, we run it against a Windows server. If it passes that, then the test is good and it goes into our test suite. And then our test suite only grows. But what that means is it's hard to put bugs in Samba. Because if we have something already tested and we have a regression test for it, then any change you make can be guaranteed not to break existing functionality. Having said that, we still do. I mean, because we can't test everything. And people break it all the time. Somebody recently reported a problem with rename that actually turned out to be some code I wrote back in 2004 that's wrong. There you go.
So you go teach yourself your own code again.
Yeah.
So looking back that far, and having that many people involved in it, there's got to be, especially around a file system, there have to be a lot of philosophical challenges when you have that many people trying to contribute to something. And maybe not, but it seems like there's always going to be the 2 or 3 different ways that people want to solve a problem or want to do things, and they typically have some sort of conflict. How have you guys dealt with that?
So, first of all, Windows is right, is the mantra that we go with, in that it has to do what Windows does. So if Windows has a certain behavior and somebody comes to us and says, I want it to do something different, we're going to say no, because we have to interoperate with Windows. Windows is considered, they're the benchmark for which SMB is tested against. And so, you know, if your changes aren't going to work with Windows, then we don't really want them. Having said that, we can extend the protocol in some ways that Microsoft has blessed. This gets into somewhat into the complicated relationship with Microsoft. So we can do some changes around that, but you can't break core Windows functionality. And the other thing that really makes Samba work is we have some incredibly smart people working on this. Now, I'm not saying me. There's Tridge. Tridge was incredibly smart after he left. There are several others on the Samba team who are incredibly focused and very, very good. They're contributing to the kernel. And they are very good at guiding contributions into the Samba way. So I've learned a lot from working with these people, because one of the things that I see in other projects that doesn't happen in Samba is when you make a code change, you make one small change for one small thing. We, like many projects, we used to come along and say, here's 20,000 lines of code change. It does this stuff. It's great. Now, somebody would come back and say, oh, that's great. We really want that. Let's break it up into 100 patches, each which changes, 20 lines of code. And let's keep it working with regression tests every single step of the way. And so it's harder to develop like that. But what it is it's teaching professional engineering. And so we have a lot of people who started off, young and enthusiastic. And here's a million lines of code. Here's, put this in. And essentially, we've helped mold them into better engineers. I've learned to be a better engineer by working with these people. They're really smart. They're very cautious, and they know how to write good code. And that's, I would put the Samba code, not the old stuff that I wrote, but the new Samba code, I would put up against any project in the world, an example of best practices. I really would. It's really good. And that's why when the libraries get spun off, people pick them up, because they're very, very useful. One of the libraries we have basically turns C code into something like C++, where you can allocate resources and then free them all with one core, which is incredibly useful if you're running a big project. It's very rare we get memory leaks now because of that library. And that library has been adopted by many other projects because it's so damn useful.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be useful, especially in C++.
Yeah, well, see, actually, C++ has a native way of doing that, which so this is mostly useful for C projects. But there are other libraries, a shared memory mapped database that is now cluster aware, so you can. There's some very interesting features of SMB that require you to have, especially if you're running it in a cluster, that require you to have a consistent database key value store, actually with much stricter semantics than many of the cloud databases, because they'll sort of say, oh yeah, we get eventual consistency. Samba requires instant consistency. You cannot have, if you've got two clients, one of them wants to open a file for read-write, you can't have another client opening that file for read-write at the same time. That's a recipe for disaster. Windows semantics don't allow it. That means you've got to have an instantly consistent database state across every node in the cluster. That's really hard. I didn't write that. Some very clever people wrote that.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. I mean, big database companies like Oracle, that's hard for even them. So
well, yeah, but our Oracle is running Yeah, I don't know that much about the. I mean, Oracle, I guess, runs in clusters these days, but that kind of consistency is very, very hard to do. I should make a mention. There's the Worldwide Samba conference coming up. SambaXP.org, if we can put that in the chat. I've forgotten the dates. It's next month on the 17th, 18th. Oh God, I should have written that down.
Look it up and throw it out there.
Let me just check that.
SambaXP.org. Thank you for giving the site, because I was actually going to Google it and it came up a bunch of Adidas shoes.
Oh no, 17th and 18th is there, and it's free. So all you have to do is register. And so yeah, that's coming up. And if anyone's really interested in learning more about Samba, I really recommend that they go to that conference. Like I say, it's free. Hey, what are you going to lose? Just some time. And you might learn something.
Let me throw that up in chat.
Okay. So yeah, we have I just shared a screen too, I think behind the scenes. There we go. Yeah. There it is.
Yeah. And as you can see, it's still sponsored by Google, Microsoft. Yeah.
This is awesome. So talk to us about security a little bit. Yeah. You like that? Is this a good topic?
Hours of conversation.
So the original SMB1 was a security disaster. I mean, well, then again, so was NFS, no file security. SMB1 was just as bad. I mean, you have to remember, it was written for a different age where people didn't have, there was one internet connection, a dial-up. And so everybody shared stuff on the LAN. And if you were in the building, you were kind of authorized, right? You're on the LAN. So, and so essentially SMB1 was unfixable. We still ship an SMB server in Samba, SMB1 server. You can turn it off. In fact, it's turned off by default. You can turn it on if you have to talk to DOS machines. Literally, that's all it uses, all it's used for. The reason we haven't taken it out yet is because there are still people out there, usually industrial control equipment, whose whole thing runs on DOS and it wants an SMB1 connection.
Seriously?
So, seriously.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there are still people out there running OS2 that requires SMB1.
Wow. I was in fifth grade. Yeah,
so, turn that off. Well, it's off by default, but so the latest version is SMB3, and it's pretty damn good in terms of security. It's an encrypted transport. It's signed by default. It's now being ported to run over Google's new Quick Internet Protocol. So normally you would not expose an SMB port, which is port 445. You would not expose that on the internet. SMB3 still runs over the same port. So the problem for ISPs is they don't know whether you're running SMB1 or SMB3. SMB3 is secure, SMB1 isn't, so they normally just block the port. It's like, don't do that. It's great for inside data centers and in local areas. But SMB over Quick is pretty secure. I mean, it's properly cryptographically reviewed by the Microsoft crypto people. It's a good protocol. It's a very good protocol. It's secure. Now, of course, the implementations can be a disaster. We've had the odd mistake here and there. Some of which are my fault, some of which weren't. It's a 5 million line C piece of C code. You're gonna have some issues. So I don't think we've had a really bad security issue for quite a few years. The last one was caused a rewrite of our entire virtual file system interface internally. Oh, that's another thing we have. You can plug in backend file systems into Samba. So we can act as a gateway, an SMB gateway to much more complex file systems on the backend. So if you're a distributed file system designer and you want to have SMB, you want to have Windows clients talk to it, the easiest way to do that is to put a Samba front end in there and plug your backend into Samba, which you can do even with a proprietary file system. You can have a proprietary backend into Samba, even though we're open source. So I would recommend that. So it's secure. Implementations are hard. It's C code. I mean, if we were doing it now, would we write it in Rust or Go? Yes, obviously. But it's 30 years old, you know. And
I mean, you could rewrite it.
well, so people are starting to experiment with putting Rust into Samba. So there's a great SUSE engineer, David Mulder, who in his spare time, he does a lot of our authentication pieces. He's actually working on putting a Rust implementation of some of the Microsoft Azure authentication protocols into Samba. I'm kind of peripherally aware of that. You'd have to have him on to give the full details on that. So it's very interesting stuff. But yeah, just like the Linux kernel is experimenting with putting Rust in, we are doing the same. We'll probably, if we're still around in 20 years' time, then we'll probably be mostly written in Rust, I would guess.
So does that pretty much answer Greg's question about Windows isn't known for being a highly secure OS?
Oh, a good question. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, is Samba more secure doing Windows file services? That's hard to say. Microsoft used to be very, very insecure. Back in the early 2000s, I would have said yes. These days, Windows hasn't had an SMB security problem for a while, not the core file serving problem. It has many other problems, sure. One of the nice things about running Samba on Linux is you can shut everything else down. Windows has a bunch of services that like to keep running all the time, whereas for Linux, you can run Samba on Linux and you can literally shut down everything else. And it's like, this thing is just serving SMB and nothing else. It's not even listening on any of the ports. It's hard to do that with Windows. I'm sure people can do that. People who know Windows much better than I, because I haven't used Windows really professionally other than as a test target for 20 years. You can probably do the same with Windows. But the other thing that I think gives us an advantage is that our code is open and people can look at it and find bugs, and they do. We had the son of a very famous hacker, I'm blanking on his name now. He went into his father's business and he's been running basically penetration tests against Samba. And he found something that was a CVE about a year or so ago. We fixed it, obviously. But he was able to find that by literally looking at the code and figuring out where we messed things up. You can't do that with Windows. Sure, you can run probes against it. You can fire random bytes at things. But it's hard to actually say, oh, hang on a minute, if I do this, this, and this, I managed to get past a check, and therefore I've gotten into something I shouldn't have. So yeah, I still think the fact that we're open and everybody can look at the code does ultimately make us more secure. I do think that's one of the. There's been many studies either way. I mean, proprietary vendors fund studies that show that they're better. Open source vendors fund studies that show that they're better. But just as a fundamental belief in the scientific method of, hey, I'm showing you how I did this, and if you can find flaws in it, let me know and I'll fix them. So, yeah.
So other than some Rust activity, what other things are on the roadmap for Samba coming up?
So go to Samba XP to see the new things that are going on. One of the things that we're trying to finalize is the SMB3 extensions for Unix, which will basically make running Linux to Samba much more like a Unix file system. So it will give case-sensitive file names, a bunch of technical details that people probably aren't that interested in, but it will make it a much stronger competitor to NFS for Unix to Unix file sharing. And there are some advantages to that, because that means that you can have one file server that serves Windows, Mac, Linux, anything, you name it, PlayStation 3. You don't have to open NFS and SMB and try and make the two talk together. You can just open SMB and have everything talk to that, and everything works. So yeah, that's one of the important things. Ralph from Cernet, he's their manager of their team. He's working on improving our distributed database backend and pushing us into being more cloud native, using some of the cloud native technologies. He had a great presentation last year on that shows actually how slow some of those databases are. They're not quite at the level that we require them for performance-wise, because Samba screams performance-wise. We can saturate gigabit links easily. I mean, we're really, really fast for bulk data transfer. Probably not so fast for metadata. So NFS has the edge on us when you're doing large numbers of operations in a directory, but for bulk data, we are really, really fast. Other things that's going on, Catalyst, another Samba vendor, they're doing an amazing work. They work a lot with the French government, actually, doing Active Directory improvements. So they have actually found bugs in Microsoft, security bugs in Microsoft's Active Directory that we then submit to Microsoft and coordinate and fixing. But so we're basically trying to make the whole ecosystem stronger and more secure. And remember, SMB is everywhere. You might think, oh, I don't use SMB for anything. You do. It's on your iPhone. You're using it. Sorry. You might not know you're using it, but it's there.
I think it kind of leads into my next question is things like IoT have been around for a while, but if you look at kind of the new buzzwords in the industry, IoT, AI, ML, all of those things, how does Samba fit in with all these newer technologies coming around? Kind of what role does it play?
So Samba is too heavyweight for tiny little sensor nodes, IoTs. The SMB protocol it actually would do quite well there, but its resource requirements are larger than those things tend to use. So we tend to fit. The interesting thing is most of those technologies based on Linux, which does have an SMB client natively built into it. Steve French of Microsoft maintains that, and a bunch of other people at Microsoft. It's not usually turned on. There's also an SMB server inside the Linux kernel as well, which is still experimental. People start working on it. It's not usually turned on. It has the capability to do all those things. People generally use web protocols for those. So Samba is mostly in the disappearing middleware. So, your IoT things would talk over the internet to something that may then be using SMB and Samba to store into a file system somewhere where it's actually being processed in the backend. So it's, it's used a lot for personal backup stuff. All my photos are backed up to Samba shares, or my music plays off Samba shares, stuff like that in the house. And a lot of people, that happens without them knowing it. It's just how things work. If they're not streaming off the internet, if they're playing from some local server, it's almost certainly Samba and SMB in there somewhere. But it's not really an IoT protocol, I don't think. But it's invisible glue is probably the best way to look at it. Yeah.
How about an AI? That always comes up a lot. AI, ML, LLMs.
The hype train.
So it's got to live somewhere.
No, I'm sure it's great. I did actually ask an AI. I said, write me an SMB server, and it just to see what it would do. And it actually got as far as opening the correct port and then parsing the first letters of the SMB1 protocol, SMB in the packet. And then it said, and the rest of it is left as an exercise to the reader. Oh, thank you. I mean, it's just storage technology. So AI uses storage. So, the way to think of SMB and Samba is it's a storage technology tool, and it's very fast for bulk data, and it solves a set of problems that most consumers don't see directly, but a lot of IT professionals do see. And so it's a very flexible tool in their toolbox for actually solving very specific problems that you may have if you're working on server-side stuff. It's the way I would think of it. No printing, please. No more printing.
Okay,
It's so fun to get a printer on a parallel.
I hate the printing code so much.
Yeah,
there are people who still use it. We get bugs logged against it, but You know, we used to have a joke in the Samba team that any new member, their first 10 bugs had to be printing bugs. It's kind of like a hazing ritual. You fix the first 10 printer bugs, then you can go off and do something nicer. But we've kind of stopped that because it was putting people off.
So you're running people away? That's awesome.
Yeah, nobody wants to work on printing bugs. I mean, remember, this is an old Windows printing protocol that even Microsoft say, hey, don't use this anymore. There's this internet printing protocol. Why don't you use that instead? So, you know, the Samba is these days split into a bunch of different services. And if you don't want that service, just don't turn it on. But the code is still there. I mean, we haven't ripped out and destroyed any of the code. Eventually, we will get rid of the SMB1 code. Once we have the full working POSIX to POSIX, Unix to Unix SMB3, at that point, I'm going to do the work and actually remove that code. And once we've got it done, we're right now at Samba 4.20. We'll call ourselves Samba 5. Now with no SMB1. Yeah. It's disabled right now, but it's like providing people, you know, with a double-edged sword. You can still stick yourself in the foot with it right now. You know, so it'd be nice to take that out and so that they can't do that. Ned Pyle of Microsoft has this wonderful website where he says, friends don't let friends use SMB1.
I love that.
They really hate it. They want to get rid of it. So.
That's awesome. So we're kind of coming up on time here, Jeremy. This has been so awesome learning all about Samba. Is there anything else that you want our viewers to know about Samba, the project, and what it's doing?
So it's useful if you're an IT professional, you want to work with it. You can get support from it from many of the Linux vendors. You can get support for it. There's a commercial site on the Samba website that show you who you can get support from. If you're writing storage products or you're actually interested in Active Directory internals, Samba is a great place. You're never going to see the code for how Active Directory works from Microsoft, at least not unless you join Microsoft, but you can see all of it inside Samba. So an Active Directory is still quite popular, still we're very, very widely used. And you know, people still have a lot of infrastructure around Active Directory. It's a great place to learn. And go to Samba XP, join the conference. Even if you just have it running in the background and you're listening, I guarantee you will learn a lot from that conference. So it's, you know, it's fun. It's like working on the Linux kernel. It's not for everybody, but people who enjoy it really love it. So it's a fun project. I'm proud to have been associated with it. And I'm proud to have helped some of the engineers who now write the code much, much better than I ever could and produce better code, smarter code, more secure and safer code. I still hang out there just to, I do paranoid code reviews. So one of the things I still try and do is when new engineers come in and they submit something, I go through them obsessively looking for integer overflow, buffer overruns. Sometimes I find them, and you know, hey, I've taught somebody something at that point. So
that's very cool.
Yeah. So, anyway, it's been nice talking to you. So who gets the prize, and why isn't it me?
Accident disclaimer: as an employee at CIQ, you are not eligible.
Ooh.
I mean, I guess you could quit and win the backpack and then come back.
Don't do that. No. Hold on.
You're not allowed to do
I'm
that.
out.
So did we make it to 1,000, or are we?
We're close. We got 961. We're just close.
Wait, what? We just got 20 just right now sitting on this. Oh, 61. No. Okay, I'm tripping. I can't do math. Yes. Okay, we're 961. Thank you.
I guess I could refresh it. It should be live, but 961 is what I see.
Yes, I see that as well. So that is exactly where we're at. Okay, we're trucking along, man. We're trucking along. So we're going to take this.
962. We got one more during this. So
we got
one more.
more during this.
I'm glad I could help.
Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Amazing. So cool. All right, you guys. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. We will definitely have you on again, Jeremy. You are a wealth of information.
We didn't even get into the lawsuit and all the horrors behind that. So
We get to
Well,
all kinds of stuff. We didn't get to the Linux kernel hardly at all. There's so much more. I mean, this is like a whole series. It could be.
the
Series
lawsuit
of
was fun.
Jeremy.
I have so many stories around that. So.
well, take a little note on that. We will
At
come
the end
back.
of it,
We were yeah, what's it?
at the end of it, Microsoft and Samba became firm friends. That's the sort of and they all lived happily ever after.
You know, Oracle, CIQ, and SUSE are all friends too.
Well, we are now. Yes.
At least we are
Yes.
now. You know,
Yeah.
That's
you
right.
can never have too many friends in the world. So we always appreciate, a good battle and a good resolution.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's a small world.
It is a very small. We're all the same people here. All right. Yeah, I think we could go on and on forever, but you guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Make sure that you like and subscribe and you share this with your friends. We are really excited to get to 1,000 subscribers. So thank you for your help with that. If you guys have any questions about what it is that CIQ does and how we're supporting the community and what are the products and services that we're providing for enterprise Linux awesomeness in the world, please reach out to us, ciq.com. And if you fill out any contact us, message us, I want more information, that information comes to us. Typically, the first stop is me. So I would love to chat with you and I will get you on a meeting with whoever it is that you need to talk to.
And also, if you have any questions that we didn't get to in this talk, ask them on the comments below the video, and I will hang out there and I will answer anything I can. So.
Jeremy, you're the best. You're the best. I love it. And then also go to sambaxp.org.
Yes. Register and enjoy.
Register really and enjoy. That's beautiful. All right. Well, thank you. You have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, and we will see you next time, same place. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks.